SAGA podcast.
And welcome back to the Space Arena, Ground Arena Saga podcast, where we cover Star Wars Unlimited from the ground up into space. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I'm joined by Banana Crapshoot. How's it going, man?
I'm good. How are you? Happy to be here.
I got a lot to say about what happened this weekend, and I imagine you went to some showdowns as well.
Yep, sure did. Before we jump in fully, I just want to
Okay.
say happy Star Wars podcasting anniversary to us. We're recording on when this releases, it should be the 1 year anniversary of Space Arena Ground Arena. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it flew by. There's been a lot to talk about.
Yeah. All right. So what are we talking about today?
Well, let's start with store showdowns. So, why don't you walk me through how many showdowns did you attend? What did you play? What were your results? How did your weekend go as far as store showdowns?
So I went to two store showdowns, one on May 11th and one this past Saturday. Both of them I played Han Command, no ECL. I ran 30 health base. The first one I finished, they were both 5 rounds of Swiss. The first store showdown I finished 4-1, made top 8 and then lost in top 8. I think my wins I'm trying to think if I remember all my matches. I know my loss was in round 5 against a Sabine deck. And then my first match I won against Sabine Yellow. My second one was against Krennic ECL. I won that one. And then I played Pout Vigilance, and I won that one. And then I played, I don't remember round 4. But then round 5 I had lost to Sabine. Maybe that was round. No, I missed. Round 3 was Cassian. So round 1 was Sabine. Round 2 was Krennic. Round 3 was Cassian. Round 4 was Palpatine. And then 5 I lost to Sabine. And then I played against Luke Command in top 8. And going into that, I knew it was going to be an uphill battle for me. Han has a hard time dealing with decks that like to upgrade. And between all the shields and like Luke Saber and like this guy was running like devotions and stuff. I won game 1. I lost game 2, and then game 3 was really close, and the guy healed like 20 to 30 damage off his base. It was ridiculous, but didn't get there in that one. Finished top 8, and then this last War Showdown, I had adjusted the Han deck a little bit. The first one I did a deck tech one. I had like the droid package in it with R2 and C3PO. And this one that I ran Saturday, I dropped the droid package, and showing it here. I dropped the droid package. And went a little more aggressively slanted, made some changes. And then in this one, I finished 4-1 after Swiss as well. My first match was against Boba Yellow, Mono Boba, which has been pretty popular recently. And took that one 2-0. And then played against Sabine ECL and had a better game plan than when I lost against Sabine in the first showdown and took that one 2-0. And then my third match was against Luke Cunning, and I lost that one 2-1. And then my next match was against Luke Command, and I was like, okay, here we go again. Just can't get over this Luke. And then I took that one 2-1. And then round 5 was against, what was round 5? I'm trying to remember. It doesn't really matter. Round 5 was
Take
against,
notes, man.
Round 5 was against Saga East, edgy Sith Lord. People from Destiny will remember him. Nate played against him. He was on Mono Palp. I took that one 2-1. Those were really tight, close games. And then that was a cut to top 4. So I played against another Saga East member who his name's Sam, lives in Ohio. Came out, and he was playing a 30 health Boba command deck without ECL. It's basically Boba Cunning, like Mono Boba, just with Vader and Overwhelming Barrage. And
That's
I
pretty good.
steamrolled him game 1. and then he steamrolled me game two, and then game three I ended up three damage short um, of closing that one out, and then he ended up winning. He beat another one of our teammates on a Krennic ECL deck in the finals 2-0. So um, top four and a top eight finish. Finished 8-2 in Swiss over two events. Um, I had a lot of fun with the deck. I think my store showdown season is pretty much over. I was only able to hit those two. There's other ones around, but with kids and other commitments, I can't make them. So hit those two. I was pretty happy with how I played and how my little play group locally, how we did overall. Lots of tops and some wins, so we played pretty well. That was my store showdown recap. So any questions or follow up for me? Overall, I guess I'll just say that I enjoyed the showdown experience. I always like getting out and playing with people, um, and it's pretty cool because you never knew what you were gonna run into, uh, match by match. You didn't, some places you could go and you're like, oh, I'm gonna play five Sabine, I'm gonna play five Boba. Nope, you never knew what you were gonna get at either of these showdowns. So, pretty diverse, wide open, well balanced meta. So congrats to FFG for putting out a good set one.
There were some people at my
That's all I
store
got.
this weekend talking about how they think this might be the most well balanced set one TCG meta that they've ever played. I mean, because really, we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about like 15 out of 16 leaders are viable. And I guess I saw a YouTube video. I didn't watch it, but I saw a YouTube video that somebody won a store showdown with Jin Urso. So maybe 16 out of 16 are viable. So
Yeah, that
very,
pretty
very
close.
well done, set one.
Yeah. What about you? How was your store showdown experience? How's that been for you?
So it was an adventure. The Friday night showdown was at 6 p.m. and it's about an hour and 20-minute drive from where we live to Dyersville. And my kid gets out of school at 4. So that gives us like a 2-hour window to make an hour and 20-minute drive, and that's not even counting in like pickup and dropping the bag off and all that. So like it felt real narrow. Plus, as you may or may not be aware, tornadoes ripped through a bunch of the Midwest, including Iowa. Uh, and we had tornado storm systems to the west of us and directly to the east of where we were driving. But like this narrow space from where we lived to Dyersville was like relatively safe looking. So I was like, okay, well, we're going to do this. We're going to hope we make it. And we made it just fine. No problems on the drive up. So we get to the shop and we're hanging out, and two people walk in that I know from the Versus universe. Also, folks from Iowa, but they're like from the opposite direction. So it was kind of cool that we met in the middle at this shop. And I was not expecting that to run into like Versus is such a small game, so to run into Versus people was really fun. So I sit down for my first round, and it's against like a literal child, like probably a 12-year-old, and he's on Boba Green, and it was decided we were going to play best of one at this event, and this one game took like 50 of the 55 minutes. Like I kept repeating to myself, I can't control what anybody else does. I can only control what I do. This kid's going to play as slow or as fast as he plays. Like, and it was a long game. But I'm on Iden Vigilance. So I'm doing like, that's a good matchup for me. Mid-range decks are my bread and butter. Walk through that, milled out the next guy. And the next round I run into is my store owner. And this is a guy I have like such a hard time beating. I do a lot of testing with this dude, and I feel like playing against him has really upped my game and is like a really good person to test against. But just like he always seems to have the top deck. You know what I mean? Like I just can't ever get past this guy. Uh, and this was no different. So I dropped a game to that dude, and then the next game I played was into Palpatine, which is my worst possible matchup. Tried to fight it out, but it was pretty lopsided. I got dominated there too. So I come into the last round. I'm like, I gotta win this to have a chance of getting one of those sweet Mace windows. And I get paired up against one of my versus friends, this woman Kayla, who the last time I saw her was at Midwinter, and she destroyed me. in one of the side events. So I was like, okay, here we go. I'm gonna get my revenge. I'm on my Iden Vigilance list. She's playing Leia. Like out of all the aggro decks, this is the one that I most want this matchup. Like she's got to go wide to get the value out of Leia that's playing right into my hands because I can prevent that. Be careful what you wish for, man. Holy smokes! Like she had a couple of things in there that caught me by surprise, like a Mace Windu, double Gorilla Attack Pod, and the game just kept playing up to she would get me to 27 health and then I'll be able to heal back down. And then she'd get me to 28 and I'd heal back down. And there was just never an opportunity where she could fire off the for a cause I believe in, which I eventually realized she had it in her hand. But every time it would kind of get close, she wouldn't have the resources left. And then I'd heal at the end of turn. And just, it was this dance back and forth until eventually I was able to grind her deck out. And I'll tell you what, man, it's been a long time since I've been like the last table at a tournament and had like all 20 people that are there standing around kind of staring at me. Like, yeah, this pressure is real, you know what I mean? So that was really fun. I had a
Yeah.
really good time at that event. Um, and walked out of there in fourth. It because we were doing best of one. It did feel a little weird. You know what I mean? Like the game kind of is. We've all become accustomed to thinking about it as best of three, uh, but it was still considering it started at 6 p.m. and we didn't get home till after 11. I'm kind of okay with it being best of one. So there was another showdown on Saturday.
Yeah.
But about the time we needed to get on the road and drive there, I went to try to wake Whitman up, and he was not having it. Like we got home way too late Friday night, so I didn't go to the Saturday one. But then I did go to the showdown at my local store on Sunday. My the guys I box with were very accommodating. We had to move training up to 7 a.m. because the event started at 9, which is like a little early, man. Um, but we got in there.
That is
I
early.
sat down for my first game against a Boba Cunning, and dude, the first game took 40 minutes. And I gotta
Wow.
say, for all of the like talk, like oh, control decks, control players play slow. No, man, I'm taking 5 second turns against somebody like staring at the floor, like looking off, like just not being super respectful. And I kind of forgotten like my tournament experience in the recent years because of the ages of my kids has been pretty limited and mostly in the versus community, which is a pretty small game, and we just don't have the like milking the clock kind of thing going on. Like there's just like we sit down, we play the game, uh and I had kind of forgotten that
Hmm.
that's a thing in TCGs, that sometimes people are like, if I just play extremely slow, then I don't have to worry about games 2 or 3 or whatever. And that's a bummer. At 43, I got to go to the bathroom in between every round, man. Like I'm drinking my water, trying to get rehydrated. And that first round, it kind of put me on tilt. Like we're all at the level that we're at, and I don't want to. We're all learning. You know what I mean? So there are some people. I'm not saying people should be necessarily required to play at the same pace as somebody who's been playing card games forever. But there's a level, like if there's 55
Yeah.
minutes, half of that time is not yours, so to speak. So the thing I think that I'm realizing, I may not be able to play the control decks that I like so much at these in-person tournaments. Because not because I don't have time to play my turns, but because my opponents just absolutely it grinds. There was one round that I had where the first game took, when we shuffled up for game two, the clock was already at like 28 minutes left. So it took more than half the time to play game one. We finished game two, we're 1-1, and my opponent's like, oh, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to figure this out? I'm like, dude, we're going to play game three. We have 15 minutes. That's plenty of time to play a game three if you play at a reasonable pace. And sure enough, we got it done. And I'm going to sound like a jerk here. I think if somebody is taking multiple minutes on their turn, they are the person who is doing the thing that's kind of rude. And it's a little frustrating to me that when I call out somebody doing the rude thing to me, the reaction is that I'm actually the rude one for saying anything, for calling the judge over and going like, "Hey man, come on. This guy hasn't done anything. It's been literally minutes since the last time he made a move. What are we doing here? I can't handle that like mentally. It's insane. Um, and the idea that like I had one where it just took so long, I literally had no break in between rounds. I had to go straight from one round to the next round, and I can't do that anymore. So I'm probably gonna have to play different kinds of decks going forward. Uh, if this is the kind of thing that I'm going to keep running into, and that's a little disappointing. It may just be the game's new. Everybody had some nerves. People were playing a little slower than they normally would. Um, but at two different events, I ran into these players who just one was a literal child. So again, asterisks. But man,
Yeah.
that was overall positive weekend. But holy smokes, I forgot how like soul crushing sitting across from somebody who's like no resources. They're not even looking at their hand. They're just kind of sitting there staring at the floor for like a minute and then up pass. Like, come on, dude. You're clearly like you're not playing the game. I'm here to play Star Wars Unlimited. I'm not here to play the clock. Can we play Star Wars Unlimited? Anyway, I'll end my rant.
Right.
Overall, positive experience. I really enjoyed how it was run at both stores. Had a little bit of sand in the gears with a couple of opponents, but I want to. I'm sure it's just nerves. Everybody was new. I don't necessarily think there was malice in it, but gosh,
Yeah.
like, let's put those reps in so it doesn't happen again. You know what I mean? Come on, fam.
Yeah. And I think some of it could be that like the store showdown is really supposed to be like the top level of like the casual tier events, right? So it's to give people an idea of like what competitive tier events will feel like. Maybe some of those people was like their first time like playing like a Swiss round event. But I do think
Sure.
overall you're 100% within your right to be like to ask the person in front of you like, hey, can you move a little faster here? Like we only got 55 minutes. Let's speed this up. And if they don't, yeah, call a judge because if they're slow playing, I mean, the judge will stand there and watch, and if they're slow playing, they'll make a call. Um, because that's not fair to you or the other people at the event, you know. Um, and
I
yeah,
had a
I
guy.
I think it's perfectly reasonable for control decks like to be moving quick. I mean, sometimes the longest turns I had on Han was when I was gonna U wing and I had to figure out what cards I was taking out. Sometimes I had to think, but most of the time I'm moving quick, and my opponents all moved pretty quick for the most part, so I didn't experience that at all. But I also wasn't playing a control deck.
I mean, and I did have opponents who moved at a totally reasonable pace, and I had a good time losing to them too. Like my day Sunday was not great, and some of that was my own headspace. Like that first round, man, one game, I remember sitting there thinking like it's happening again. I'm gonna have another game one that goes 45 minutes. Like what is going on here? Dude, dude at one
Yeah.
point he plays cunning, right? And he goes, I'm going to give +4 attack to this unit and +4 attack to that unit. And I said, man, you
That's
can't
not how that
do
works.
that. He's like, well, it says on the card, I get to choose two. I'm like, you can't choose the same one twice. But call a judge, always I don't ever expect my opponents to take my word for a rule in a competitive environment. That's silly. Judge comes over, obviously agrees with me because I'm right. Uh, Goes off, does his thing. The guy puts a card back in his hand, thinks about it for another like full minute, plays it again, and says, I'm going to return that unit and that unit of yours to your hand. I'm like, dude, you can't do that. Yeah, okay. Picks up the cunning again, goes to play it a third time, and he goes, you have to discard two cards. And at this point, I almost snapped. I was like, you can't do like
Yeah, you can't.
now. It's his first competitive card game. Obviously, it's his first event. Like, how much shit? Like, was that just nerves, or was this dude deliver? Like, I don't know. I don't. I want to assume, I'm going to decide to assume that it was just the nerves of the moment got to him. And like we've probably all had that moment in a card game where we have like blinders on and we can't see the forest for the trees. But what I was thinking at that moment on Sunday was like, this dude is deliberately wasting my time. Like this is crazy. So the lesson for
Yeah.
me is I have to calm down and play decks that require less total actions to win games. Like that's just I think that's what it's going to come down to. Like as much as I love control decks and having to like make tons and tons of choices, if this is how it's going to be, I gotta play something faster.
What was Whitman's experience like at the showdown he went to?
So the Dyersville one, he was real nervous because this was not only not our home store, but it was like, over an hour away. What kind of people are going to be there? I don't know. Fortunately, it was another store kind of like our home store that is really family friendly. So there was four or five other, dads, of course, there with their kids. And that was very cool because not every game store is cool about kids. I don't remember what happened. His first round was against Mitch. Shout out to Mitch from like largely considered to be like one of the greatest, probably the second greatest versus player we've got. Like that guy is tough in every game that I've ever seen him compete in. So Witt lost his first round, and then the second round he played a guy that he beat, and the guy came up to me afterwards and was like, "Hey man, I just wanted to tell you, if I ever have kids, I hope they're as cool as your kid." And like he had all this praise for my boy, so that was very cool. Um, I don't remember the rest of his matchups, but so the he ended up coming in, I think, eighth or ninth based on record with tiebreakers or whatever. So he had a decent day. And then he had a pretty rough Sunday as well. Both him and I had kind of good Friday nights and kind of rough Sundays. But overall, good times. He didn't have kind of the sort of like meta game complaints that I had. He just got rough matchups, made a misplay in one of his games that cost him a match, and he was a little mad at himself about that. But I mean, who hasn't been there? You know what I mean? So
Well,
overall, very
good for him
positive.
that
He's
like
super excited for the next one. Go ahead.
good for him though for like realizing that and looking back and like, reflecting and, corrective action for the future, being able to identify those things and those points in the game where where it turned either for you or against you, like being able to identify that stuff in reflection is a skill that not everyone has. So good for him. What did he play? I'm curious.
So he Boba and Energy Conversion Lab in his sealed pool at the pre-release, and he also pulled Darth Vader and Boba Fett in his packs at the pre-release. So he's been kind of on Boba ECL like from day one, and that's what he played. I mean, now the deck has kind of changed since pre-release compared to what it looks like now, but it's a pretty typical Boba ECL list. Um, like maybe the only like spicy card that's in there is probably the Cunning. Like that might not show up in every list, although I think people have caught on to the fact that Cunning's the best card in the set now. Uh, he struggled with whether he wanted to do ECL or 30 point base. Like actually in his box, we had both bases because he would test both. And ultimately that steadfast ECL turn is just so strong. But I think it's so because it's so strong, it's a little telegraphed. Everybody knows it's coming. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it performed as well for him as he was expecting it to. Like, I mean, it's still very good, but people can kind of prepare for that now. And it's hard to get those like really juicy, like swing in with your 7/7 into a dude with two health and like do five breakthrough. Like those turns just people have gotten wise to that play pattern, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. You going to any more showdowns, or is your showdown season kind of over for set one?
Uh, there is yet another store that has one on June 1st, and then the store that I couldn't attend uh their showdown last Saturday, they're gonna have one on the second. I might have those dates mixed up, but yeah, there's two more. There's another one on the first and one on the second, within driving distance of me, and I'm gonna try to hit at least one of those.
There's a couple more in my area. I just can't get to them with like baseball now. We're winding down the
Hmm.
kids' baseball season, and now like they're both in the playoffs. So my baseball season has not ended. So um, we'll see. But as of right now, I'm not going to anymore.
Yeah, my
What
Saturdays are
if you
spoken
go to
for
one of those?
because of
Um,
soccer for the foreseeable future.
so you get it. You you were playing Iden Vigilance. You still on that? You gonna move on to Han Command, or what's your thoughts for
So
what you would
I
run
do
at your
actually really
next
like
showdown?
Han Command. Han Command is a great deck. I've had a lot of fun messing around with it. I never really wanted to move onto Iden Vigilance. Like, I don't really want to build decks that don't have cunning in them. But four cost Vigilance is just like really good, man. So that's kind of where I ended up.
It is.
But
It's
I
even
think
better
part
when
of
you
what
pay.
informed that choice is, yeah, it's four is way better than six. Although in my Iden list, I'm paying a Spark of Rebellion for six, so it's like aspect taxes all over the place. Um, I think the online testing options that exist gave me a somewhat distorted perception of the meta that I was going to walk into in my stores. Uh, there was very small number of control decks at both showdowns that I went to in person, and there was a ton of like more aggressive and like kind of faster mid-rangey stuff. So I was expecting a much more controlling meta than I walked into either time. Probably I should have thought about that and adjusted my main deck to be a little less tuned for like control mirrors. But that's, my general outlook was like, hey, I'm bringing a control deck and I'm not going to lose to the other control decks. Uh, I don't think I'm going to do that again. I've started to shift into trying to look at some mid-range stuff. Wit wants to build Tarkin blue, so I think he's going to claim all the Super Laser Blasts and Avengers from me. So I guess I'm going to build heroes now. So we'll see where that takes me. So speaking of kind of thinking about how the different leaders slot into the meta, we're getting close to the end of set one here. I guess what are your sort of in summary thoughts with regard to how the set one meta looked? I know we touched on earlier how it's balanced and like basically every leader has some playability. How well do you think they did on the meta? Are there leaders that you think haven't been able to shine this time around that are going to get lifted up in set two? Just, I guess, what are your thoughts on where we're at with as we reach an end of this set one meta?
Looking back in retrospect, I posted something on Twitter on my personal account a couple days ago that uh, Tyler, one of the designers, retweeted, and that was that um, I said the Spark of Rebellion meta is the most balanced and well designed set one card game I've ever played, and that they knocked it out of the park. And I still think that 2 days later or whatever, um, I think they nailed it. There's it's crazy how like you never know what you're gonna play against. Really, you're gonna see Sabine or late aggro. You're gonna see some version of Boba Fett, and you're gonna see some version of Control. But you really don't know what's in that Cracker Jack box. Um, all the time. I think overall they did a very good job designing this set and making it appealing, easy to access, and playable and diverse. I mean, there's 18 leaders, and more than half of them you could easily lose to at any time on any deck, really. So, um, I think they did a great job. Can't say enough positive things about set one overall, and that has me even more excited for set two. I think a couple leaders that probably didn't get as much love in set one that could get more love in set two. I think Jin and Cassian are the easiest ones to look at. I mean, the ability for Cassian to draw cards should be really good. So I think maybe set two we see something to go into that, and I think Jin looks like she should have a strong mid-range ability. So maybe that blossoms a little bit in set two. And maybe IG88, he's a go wide leader. Maybe with more units and more cheap units available to him, he'll have a better chance to go wide. So maybe I'll say those three: IG, Cassian, and Jin. I think those three probably have potential in set two. And I think there's a bunch in set one that'll stay viable in set two. Um, Luke and Vader. They just need villainy or heroism cards to be relevant, and they're always going to make those. Boba Fett obviously I think can stay relevant. Han can, because I think basically any of the leaders that aren't tied to traits specifically, like So Tarkin's tied to Imperials, so he's only as good as Imperials are for the most part. Um, like Krennic doesn't care about traits, Iden doesn't care about traits, Palpatine doesn't care about traits. So all those leaders that aren't tied to specific traits, I think, can be good and relevant and maybe better in set two. But I think the leaders that are tied to specific traits will they might slow down because how I don't think we're going to see as much Imperial support in set two. Obviously, um, they look it's looking like they're really expanding on Mandalorian and Bounty Hunter and Underworld and that kind of stuff. So I don't know how much Imperial trait love we're gonna get there. So, but like Luke, Boba Fett, Sabine, I think can stay really good. Um, there's probably like 5 or 6 leaders from set one that I think that are good now that'll stay good in set two. So that's going to be even crazier in set two when you have another 18 leaders and probably more than half of them are viable. And then you have like, 30 something leaders you got to worry about. Seems pretty wild. But what are your thoughts and retrospect on set one overall and going into set two?
So versus is not a perfect comparison because the sets are so small. And it's not quite the same thing. Like the LCG model and the TCG model are pretty fundamentally different. But the concept of having these main characters and having like a large pool of them, but most of them are completely unplayable competitively. Really, you're looking at, maybe the top 10%, maybe even worse than that. Maybe like the top 1% of main characters in any given pool are usually the ones that people spend 75% of their testing time on. I
Mm.
think it's wild that this game has come out and created a set one TCG meta where basically every leader is playable, asterisk Jin Urso. I mean, just because somebody got one result with Jin doesn't make her good, you know. There is no, I think it's fair to say there is no dumpster tier. There are clearly leaders that are better than others, but I've played a lot of card games, man. I've played in a lot of set one metas, and the whole idea of having like a leader or a champion or a main character or whatever is a relatively common thing across card games. And I cannot think of one where you've had a 250 card pool and basically every tent pole, every champion, every commander uh, had some level of competitive viability. It maybe Hera and should be added to the Jin list as like maybe not competitive, like, but that's still really really good. So I'm very impressed with what they pulled off with this first set. Um, I think your analysis of calling out the leaders that all benefit from being able to go wide, being the ones that have the most to gain in a second set is spot on. The quality of units once you can start to cut stuff like Battlefield Marines, the generic units that have no ability but just good stats, once those start to go away for units that have better abilities and better stats, those are the decks that are going to benefit. Uh, Control, if we get a second board wipe, man, give me a second Super Laser Blast so I can have 6 board wipes in my deck, and then we'll talk about how toxic Control is. That's the stuff I'm excited about. I'd like to see villain top end cards and Cunning in particular, and I'd like to see some hero cunning cards as well, but more low end, because Han Solo is a great top end. So that's what I want in cunning is some good hero low end cards and some good villain top end cards, and I think that's going to help out. Well, Thrawn, of course. I think what's kind of interesting though is we both sort of mused about the meta and kind of started talking about set two, and neither of us has mentioned any of the set two leaders that have been revealed as we move into set two. Now, the premise was how is set two going to affect these set one leaders? But out of the ones that have been revealed, are there any set two leaders that like stand out to you as early competitors to shake up the meta or to show up at your tournament table?
So there's two, there's probably three, but two really that I'm most intrigued by and like excited about, and I've started like messing with uh myself as like theory and deck building and like gold fishing. The first one that I'm most excited about is Ray, um, because she's villainy heroism. This is her front side is an action. You pay one to give an experience token to a unit with 2 or less power, and then she deploys on 6 resources, and she has 2 power and 6 health, and then her ability moves to an on attack ability. Give an experience token to a unit with 2 or less power. She also has a keyword restore 3. So she buffs small units and restores 3. And some of the units that she can buff is stuff like Yoda. That's a 2/4. So now he becomes a 3/5 with restore 2, and then she can buff herself, so she can be a 3/6 or a 3/7 with restore 3. Um, and then there's a card that we looked at earlier in the set called Follower of the Way. It's like a 2-cost Mandalorian. It's like a 1/3, and it has an ability that when this unit is upgraded, it gets +1/+1. So you give it an experience token from Ray, and now it's basically a +2/+2 because now it's upgraded. So then it becomes a 3/5 instead of a 1/3. So there's other cards we've seen like the Cartel Turncoat. It's like a space unit that's like a 2/3 that then becomes a 3/4. So like there's a bunch of those little things where the units are cheap. They have low attack power, obviously, and then she buffs them, and where she differs from Tarkin, she's similar to Tarkin in that she gives experience tokens, but she's very different from Tarkin in that she's not tied to a specific trait. Like Tarkin is tied to Imperials. You are not playing Tarkin outside of an Imperial deck. You can play Rey in anything as long as you have these little dudes that she's going to buff and make stronger. And we've seen archetypes similar to this in other games where you try to go wide with a bunch of small units, right? But now she's making them stronger, and she's fixing the math on those. And the thing that is wild about her is she has restore 3. So not only she's buffing all these other things, but she becomes this huge threat. So she's one that I'm really excited about is Rey. And then the other one is Kylo. Kylo Ren is the other leader that I'm excited about because he just looks wild to me, right? He's like his ability is that he can discard a card from his hand to give a unit +2 power, and then he deploys on 4 resources, right? Very early, and then he's a 5/4 when he deploys. But he gets -1 power for each card in his hand. So you almost want to play like some sort of top deck game so that you can have that 5/4, but he's only got 4 health, so he's going to die easy. So I don't know. There's something there I think it's really intriguing where you could have a force traded leader in villainy deploy on 4, and then like your force lightning and your force throw like are online super early, reliably every game. That seems like it could be pretty cool. So Kylo and Rey, but I'm most excited for Rey right now.
Yeah, out of all the set 2 leaders that they've shown us so far, Kylo is probably the only one that I'm interested in. I think Ray looks cool, like the art is cool. Uh, but this theme of buffing up little dudes, eh, I mean, it's probably work. I don't mean to like be negative about it. I just it didn't like grab my imagination as a deck builder the way Kylo did. I saw that leader and I'm like, oh, okay. So this guy has this weird reward for having no cards in hand. All right, that sounds interesting to try to deal with. Although I will say, out of the set 2 cards that we've seen so far, none of the leaders have got me like super, super pumped. My excitement has come from the unit cards that we've seen. Well, some of the unit cards that we've seen.
You're not excited about, you know, her heroism Boba Fett?
I forgot he even got revealed. That's how excited for that guy I am. I think it's cool to put Boba Fett. Like this is the promise that they gave us when they made heroism and villainy the factions rather than light side and dark side, or splitting the color pie in that way. We can have the Boba Fett when he's on his hero arc, and I think putting that version of Boba Fett into the command faction makes sense, given that he's in command of a criminal organization at that time. So I think that's cool that we can see the villain Boba Fett and the hero Boba Fett. I hope that we see that kind of thing with other characters. Like let's give us a Luke Skywalker in his like even if it's just a villain moment where he was about to kill or spoiler alerts for the Force Awakens, I guess. But that would be cool to have these different moments, even if it's just a split second within the continuity of like the Star Wars storyline, having that like villain Luke. Well, what does that mean? How would that be represented on a card? I think that's cool. So I like the design space of heroism Boba Fett, but as far as a character, it's like and and just because something doesn't grab my imagination doesn't mean it's bad. Like if somebody else is really excited for those cards, I don't want to be negative about those cards. There just hasn't been the leader that has made me go. Like I haven't found my Thrawn in the set two reveals yet. Like that was the leader that really got me pumped in set one, and that hasn't happened yet.
That's fair. I don't think that hasn't happened for me yet either. But just of the ones we've seen, Kylo and Rey are the ones I'm excited about.
Well, let me change the pace here because I will talk about a card that I'm actually thrilled for, and that is Bazine Natal. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. Apologies to
It's close enough. I knew you were gonna talk
Bazine
about this
Natal
card.
fans. Uh, this is a two cost cunning villainy affiliated 1/3. When played, look at an opponent's hand. You can discard one of those cards. If you do, that player draws a card, and it has a smuggle cost of 4, which we've kind of come to expect and largely panned on the show. We've talked about how the +2, basically an aspect tax for smuggle, is way too much. I agree with that most of the time. That is not the case on this card. I will absolutely pay 4 resources to look at your hand and force you to throw one of those cards away. I absolutely do not care about you drawing a card. Like, as far as that being a drawback to me, that is not a drawback to me. If this isn't a Cunning Vigilance deck and you have no cards in your deck to draw, I now just dealt 3 damage to you, as well as ripped one of the last things you have left out of your hand. And I got a 1/3 body. This card does it all, man. Like I am so thrilled. And it's only a rare. It's only a rare. Man, this card is going to be great. It's going to be everywhere.
This card is gonna be super annoying to have to play against. 100%. I agree. I don't know if I'd smuggle it. I probably won't play this because I'm not really. I don't know if this card fits in my play style, but I definitely see where it's good. Um, yeah, Bazine is going to be a pain to deal with for sure.
I think it
Do you have any
fits
other
so
cards you're
perfectly
excited for?
into the yes, I do. But let me say one more thing about Bazine before we move on. Uh, I think it fits
Yeah,
so
go for it.
perfectly into the Millstock shootout. So when you've got the mill thing going and you're relying on the restocks and you're trying to like play this dance with your opponent where what you need to do is force them to have to restock at a moment where you have a vigilance available to mill all their stuff away. Like when you're trying to do the math around that millstock matchup, one of the cards that's like really good there is the Bounty Hunter crew. So that's like an 8 cost card. Another card is Spark. Or well, it's an 8 cost card if you're paying the 2 aspect tax. That's what I'm saying. Another one is
Mm-hmm.
Spark, and in double blue Iden, I'm playing Spark for 6 to get basically this effect. So to be able to pay 4 for this is totally reasonable because it's basically this effect. Plus, you could deal damage if their deck's already empty. Plus, it's a body. Plus, and maybe the most important thing, this card is hidden in my row until I need it at the very end stage of that game, which is the only, like, it's Frieza's final phase when both players have nothing left in their deck and you're at the end of that, like, Millstock shootout. That's when this card's going to be so good. So the smuggle text on this, even if it was smuggle 6, I think it's still playable. It's a spark of rebellion that I can hide in my row. You can't rip it out of my hand, and then I have it right when I need it to make sure you don't have your restock. This card is phenomenal. Like I could go on, but I will stop. I will talk about a different card now. I want to talk about Dr. Pershing. Another absolutely ridiculous control tool, a 2 cost vigilance villainy affiliated 0/5 with the ability exhaust it, deal 1 damage to a friendly unit, and draw a card. This might be all by itself the thing control really needed to metastasize into like a true cancerous force in Star Wars Unlimited meta. The additional card draw, this is so much more reliable than some of the other things that we've been doing for card draw. Like the Mining Guild TIE Fighters are terrible. Don't play them. I Am Your Father is, you don't necessarily want it to be card draw. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's damage. This is just straight up reliable, like gas in the tank. This is the kind of stuff control decks absolutely need. And if you're on aggro and you're wasting attacks going into Pershing, you're playing right into my plan anyway. Love this card. Love every part of it.
Pershing looks another one that looks really annoying to deal with because me, I don't want you to have a much bigger hand than me, So, um,
Mm-hmm.
Pershing definitely annoying, and he can target himself, right? So, I mean, there's also that.
Yeah.
Um,
So
very
think about him with Tarkin, because he's got the Imperial tag. So you do his thing, put a damage on him, draw a card, and then Tarkin puts a +1 on him. And then maybe he comes out and attacks and puts another +1 on him. So this guy is like a card drawing engine that you can, for relatively low cost, like keep buffing up and making stronger. And then if you're presenting your opponent with multiple like things they have to deal with, multiple threats, the little dirtily guy in the back who's just letting you draw a card, he's always going to be at the bottom of the threat totem pole. And like that's what's going to let those mid-rangey or at least patch through the mid. This could either be good in a mid-range specific deck where he can stay alive, or as part of a control tool, which I think is where he's really going to shine.
Yeah, I think he's a shoe-in for control decks 100%. I don't know if like mid-range, maybe some mid-range decks, but I don't see if anybody's running like a vigilance aggro deck. Which I guess I don't know why you would, but if you were, I don't think I think he just slows you down too much in an aggro
I mean,
playstyle.
this would be off aspect, but if you think about like Chewbacca
Yeah.
wants to do that like kind of dirtily like turns like 2, 3, 4, 5, kind of in that like mid-range chunk of turns, he wants to just like put out sentinels and things that slow the opponent down. And on villain side, we've got like Chilton as a turn 4 just thing to put in the way. So if you're playing that kind of deck that's going to be throwing sentinels out anyway, maybe you can't get away with playing him on turn 2. But with 5 defense, maybe you can. Maybe you just play him on turn 2 and they ignore him because they don't have any units that can hit for 5 yet. And by the time they have the units that could clean him up, well, now you've got sentinels in the way. I'll agree that it's a much riskier proposition for a mid-range deck because typically they only want to play one thing per turn. Gross generalization, but nonetheless. Whereas in
Yeah.
control, you've probably got the ability to remove the opponent's threats while setting up your defenses, and he can kind of hide out back there a little bit longer. I suspect that's where he's going to shine, but he could have more applications than just the one archetype. Maybe.
Yeah. That's fair.
Did you have any other cards from the recent spoilers that you want to touch on?
Sure. I got two we can talk about if that's cool with you.
Sure.
Um
Yeah, let's
the
do it.
first one, since I've been playing Han, this one I feel like just goes right in to a Han deck. And that is a new 3-drop cunning heroism unit called Coruscant Dissident. It is a 4 health ground unit that says on attack you may ready a resource. Thinking about how many games, like especially into aggro decks, where my turn 1 is playing Ezra, having another option at a 3-drop to play on the ground besides Ezra that also has a awesome like ability, I'm super excited about. So Coruscant Dissident, I think, is gonna be it's gonna see play. I think it fits right in Han, and I'm sure some other decks too. But that's one I think is pretty cool. And then another one
You're right about that. Three
giving
cost, needing something to do that isn't just Ezra. Totally agree with you there. The echo based defenders
yeah, I
in
mean
those Han decks, I don't think they're good enough.
no, and so in mine I went to 2 Echo Base and added 2 Homestead Militia because like the 4/3 most of the time it's absorbing 1 hit, and the Homestead Militia early can be it has a 3/4 stat line, so most of the time you can trade with units, and then late game it's a more relevant Sentinel than the 3 health Sentinel. So that's a discussion for another time. But yeah, the 3/4, because in Han against the aggro decks especially, you're looking to play a 3-drop 1 and trade into whatever they played on their first turn, um, and then still have your thing, right? So this fits right in there. Yeah, another one I'm excited about. Uh, Dryden Voss looks pretty cool to me. So this is top end of a cunning villainy deck. He's a 7-drop with 5 power and 7 health. So he's got Vader stats, the Vader unit. He comes in shielded, and then he has a when played ability to choose a captured card guarded by a unit you control, and then you play it for free under your control. So this requires more setup than Vader, but you get a similar but different effect where instead of searching your deck for a card, you just take your opponent's cards. So you obviously have to play cards that allow you to capture cards. So this takes more setup, but I think it has a really cool ability, and it's a 7-drop in cunning villainy that we didn't have before. What are your thoughts on Dryden?
Very excited. Like just having a 7 cost body that cunning villains can play is exciting. This one having the 5/7 stats, I'm with that. Shield is great. I don't know how good capture is going to be, but given that this was just a straight up dead spot in the cunning villain curve, even if the get to play a captured dude thing doesn't end up being that relevant, I think the rest of what this card brings to the table is something that I am excited to put into my cunning decks. Yeah, I agree with you. This is a pretty hot card. I like it.
So now that you, what are your thoughts on? So we saw another 7-drop cunning unit that was revealed earlier. The Fennec Shand unit. That's a 4/6 with ambush, and then it has the on attack where you deal a damage to the defending unit for each different cost among cards in your discard pile. Do you think Fennec Shand or Dryden is more up your alley as like the 7 drop slot in your deck?
Are you? It's gonna come down to, are you playing things like Surprise Strike, Shoot First, like these cards that require you to have units that stick to the board to get value out of them? If you are, I think the shields on Dryden are super relevant. You play him out, even if they have units to crash into him, he's got a big butt and that shield to get through. So that I think would increase the likelihood that you'd be able to, on the subsequent turn, fire off that surprise strike or whatever it is that you're buffing your unit with. Whereas Shand is probably more likely to go into those decks that aren't relying on the like combat trick based. Like she's going to come out and do something all on her own, which maybe means her overall ceiling is a little lower than Dryden. I mean, obviously if you have a captured 7-drop and you play Dryden, you get a free 7-drop. Like the sky's the limit with this guy. So I think his power ceiling is probably a little bit overall higher, and he's going to be more beneficial to the decks that have something to do that benefit, like cards that say if you control a cunning unit, your Gamorrean guards are probably safer with, maybe that's not the best example, but you know what I'm saying. Fennec is kind of a all-in-one package, whereas Dryden feels more like a combo piece to me. So based on the kind of decks I like to play, I'm probably leaning a little bit more towards Fennec. She like comes down and just kills something, like it's a removal plus a body, whereas Dryden is like a little bit slower. I guess it is very much a combo piece. It's comboing with capture as well as being a sticky body that you can surprise strike or whatever with. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Dryden definitely has more upside. I think his ceiling's way higher, but um, I like I like Fennec Shand having ambush. I think I probably like her overall in the kind of decks I like to play. I'm more of like I guess I've discovered in my time that I'm more of like a somewhere between a aggro to tempo to mid range player. Like I oscillate in somewhere in that sphere. So I think Fennec would probably be more up my alley. Do you have any
All
others
right.
that you're excited about?
Well, there are a couple more that I had picked out here that really stood out to me. I started with the the ones I was most excited for. So now I'm falling down to like the tier two levels of excitement. And the first one at tier two is going to be Fell the Dragon, the four cost vigilance plot twist. What am I saying? The four cost vigilance
Nice.
event. Defeat a non-leader unit with five or more power. So it's basically like reverse takedown. It's very reminiscent of how the removal spells for the priest worked in Hearthstone, how they had these like different stat-based removals. I love this. I love the idea of having the ability to deal with those devastators and, star destroyers that are making my life miserable. Bring it on. Fantastic removal card.
Yeah, I think this definitely slots right in all those annoying event heavy control decks. Especially like in the mirror, right? Like those are slogs and they're slug fests, especially at the end of the game when everybody's just dropping star destroyers on each other. So, um, a way, like you said, a way to get to remove that Avenger. The only thing it doesn't hit right away is Relentless. You gotta play another event first to burn it up. So, um, but yeah, this is a cool card.
It
I really
it
dig
feels
the
kind
art
of
on it too.
reminiscent of like Power of the Dark Side or Vanquish. Like the initial impulse is to compare it to Takedown because it's a stat limited removal. Man, there's so many things like non-leader with five or more power. That's a lot of stuff. So this feels a lot more open-ended, like Power of the Dark Side or Vanquish, as compared to like Takedown, which feels a little bit more limited. I kind of stepped on you when you said it there, but yes, you're correct. The art on this card is also fantastic.
Hmm.
Okay, the last card that I picked out of my greatest hits here for the recent reveals is the three cost Cunning Villainy event triple dark raid. Search the top seven cards of your deck for a vehicle and play it. Put other cards on the bottom of your deck in a random order. It costs five less and enters play ready, and then return it to your hand, its owner's hand, at the end of phase. So you pay three and potentially get a five cost unit out on turn, and it comes into play ready. Like,
Hmm.
what is this card, man? This is bananas.
Yeah. It seems really good. It seems really, really good. uh, yeah. Just so if you did it on when you had four resources, you paid three for this, and you could pull your fire spray and play it. And whether you have Boba Fett or Jango Fett or not, it comes in ready. So because of playing the card, so that seems pretty solid to me. Having to deal with a fire spray on turn three sounds terrifying.
I mean, I'm thinking of being at seven resources and you play this and you get an Avenger and then you attack with the Avenger the same turn and kill two things.
Yeah, that's disgusting too. Yeah,
Like, this card is nuts.
it is. I agree.
All
Kind of
right,
like
man.
a new adventure. That one's pretty nuts too.
Let's you want to talk about that one real quick before we wrap things up here?
Sure. A new adventure is a two cost. It's a double cunning, right? So it's one of the double aspect cards. It says return a non-leader unit that costs six or less to its owner's hand. Then its owner may play it for free. So if you have something kind of juicy out, right, six or less, like the ghost or a fire spray, why would you have the ghost? I don't know why you'd have the ghost in a double cunning deck, but if you do have the ghost or a fire spray or something else like the new Falcon, that costs six,
Cantina Bouncer
you
is another great example.
you can you can return it to your hand and then you can play it again for free. So you get do it again. Like you can just do it again. Like I don't know, seems crazy to me. Play fire spray, attack with it. Now I'm gonna bounce it back to my hand and then come in and it's ready again and I get to attack with it again. Seems ridiculous. There's a lot of effects like the triple dark raid, a new adventure, and Palpatine's return that all seem wild, and I'm all about it. You got any
Yeah,
cool thoughts on a new
yeah.
adventure?
g- Getting units into play for less than they're supposed to cost is pretty bananas. And being able to like have them come into play and be ready, like the triple dark raid, is even worse. Like it feels like it's dangerous design space to be playing around in. Like these effects feel so abusable. But on some level, I think given how well tuned the set one meta is, I don't want to sit here and start chicken littling and being like, oh, the OP sky is falling. But man, some of these effects seem inescapably oppressive. And I'm really excited to see what kind of tools they're giving us. Because my assumption isn't that we're misunderstanding it and they're not as good as we think they are. I think they are as good as we think they are. And what's going to balance it is they're just going to give us tools to deal with, hey, units just come into play ready all over the place and for cheaper than they're supposed to be. I mean, we already have a little bit of a taste of that with like DJ, Super Laser, and Resupply. Like we got a little bit of ramp and we know how that feels. Well, this is like it's going to get supercharged in set two. Like the new adventure is not ramp necessarily, but it kind of acts that way, and then it lets you play these cards for free or get more resources worth of value into play than you should have in that turn. Okay, let's strap in. Let's do it. I'm here for it, man.
What's interesting is like if someone would like traders your unit, that's probably a bad example, but if they would change of heart your unit, right? You can use this to get it back to your hand to play for free. So it's another thing. It's another way to get around people
Dude,
stealing
wouldn't
your
that be
stuff.
brutal? Oh, you stole my Avenger? Okay, cool. Well, I guess that wouldn't work because it costs too much. Still. All
If you
right.
had the
Well, I think
Avenger in
that
play and then like next turn, I was just gonna say like if you played the Avenger and then next turn they played Change of Heart, then you just play this to get your Avenger back. But yeah, it is too expensive because it's 6 or less. I see what you're saying.
yeah, yeah,
Never
it's got to
mind.
be. And
I
it'd
caught
be
on.
probably weird to have
Took me a
Avenger
minute,
in a
but I got
double
there.
yellow deck, but still. All right, well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the agenda for today. Was there anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here, man?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good. I think we hit it. We did it. A year
All
later,
right,
still doing it.
well, happy 1 year anniversary. And until next time, we will see you in the arenas.